Hello, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our Humble Associates webinar with myself, your host, and Arif, my wonderful co host.
Hello, everyone. Glad to be here back again for another episode, aren't we, TK?
Yes, we are. And as always, we enjoy having you on Tuesdays. This time, we're going to talk again about something quite interesting because there's been quite a lot going on in the area of leadership development. So we wanted to talk about the newest trends in leadership development.
Indeed.
So hopefully you'll enjoy it. And if you're working in leadership development, or even if not, I'm hoping that you'll find it useful. But what we would love to know is a bit more about yourselves. So do tell us who you are. First of all, if you are an L&D or HR professional, put an A in the comment. If you are a leader, you might want to put a B. If an Agile practitioner, a C, because we sometimes have a lot of Agile practitioners joining us. And if it's a neither, put a D in. It's a great way of introducing yourself. So, Arif, what's the most interesting work title you've heard someone actually tell you?
Oh, I think we've had a combos, isn't it? Combos
Yes.
are nice. Yeah, a lot of L&D practitioners who are leaders and maybe applying a bit of agility as well. So
That's true. We can see some Bs, we can see some Cs, but also some great As. So lovely to see you. We can see some of your wonderful comments. As always, LinkedIn is delivering them to us with a bit of a delay, but we're happy to see you here. And thank you for arriving in such large numbers. So
Amazing.
Let's move on. And today we'll talk about, again, something interesting. But first, I think it's important to acknowledge one thing, which is that the landscape of leadership development is now shifting a lot, and it's constantly shifting. So, Arif, what makes it shift at this particular time?
Well, there's lots going on in the world, isn't it,
Yeah,
TK? I mean, we've got economic situation which is perhaps not the most what's the word, fruitful for businesses and organizations. I think we're coming out of a recession in the UK, or we dipped into it apparently, so they tell us. Inflation, cost of living. I think there's lots. Well, if you're in the UK or even in Europe, some of these challenges are well known, and so with all of that, I think it brings new or differing type of challenges and problems for business organizations to overcome. And perhaps even more importantly, given our topic today, a different type of leadership approach is needed. Is that right, TK?
I think so. And I think, we'll get to that definitely in terms of like what we think. But we believe that in the modern world, you can't approach leadership development the same way you did it 20 years ago.
No.
Something has to be different. So what we did is we've analyzed a lot of trends from our own experience and looking at what other people say. We found some great sources, one of which, there's a nice article in Forbes by these two wonderful gentlemen, Brent Gleason and Matthew Learning, and they actually talked about the top 5 trends of leadership development. And actually, we agree with all of them. So we thought, we will use that as our wonderful source and give our comments on what they think should be the trends. So, Arif, are we ready to kick off?
I'm ready if you're ready, TK.
Yes.
Let's go. Yeah.
But if you're following us, and we see quite a few people joining us, it's always surprising for us how LinkedIn is sometimes promoting us, sometimes it isn't. But you're joining us in droves, so welcome again. And let us know why you think leadership development needs to be a bit different now, and what's different about leadership development. But what we wanted to talk about first is it's very important to have the emphasis on emotional intelligence. So what's emotional intelligence, Arif? That's a type of intelligence some people might not know about.
Well, I'm hoping many of our listeners or viewers do. But yeah, I mean, this is all about, really having the self-awareness and the kind of human understanding of the people you're leading, being able to relate to them, being able to get the best out of your line reports, if that's the role you're in, where you're in a management role or you're in a line management role, so to speak. Getting the best out of your team members, being able to relate to them, being able to create a space for them that they are able to maximize their ability to be as creative and as, productive in the working environment. So all of that, I think, comes into it. And it's about, if you know yourself, understand your own leadership style, understand your own kind of limits, understand what is important to you, your own needs, etc. I think it makes for a more emotionally intelligent person overall, not just as a leader, because you'll be able to then tap into that and understand, okay, what's happening in the team environment, what's being unsaid, perhaps, what's the body language of those around me when things are happening, whether they're positive or not so positive, right? And then being able to react accordingly based on how it's impacting me as a leader, for instance. That's
very good point, Arif. And the reason we chose this is because we want to talk about the aspects of it. So you've mentioned a lot around self-awareness and self-regulation, right? So being able to look within yourself. So in leadership development, as we do it quite a lot, we focus a lot on helping leaders actually get there, to focus on themselves and reflect. But another thing is really important is interpersonal effectiveness. So the first one was looking outside, to seeing other people and having the emotional intelligence. Sorry, the other way around. But this one is looking outside and making sure you understand other people. And finally, you combine the two for effective decision making. So why is emotional intelligence important when making decisions, Arif? What do you think?
Well, I mean, as I was trying to say earlier, I think, your decision making is really going to be impacted. Well, let's take it another perspective. As many of our viewers might be aware, as you know, TK, we're big fans of Leadership Circle as a development tool, right? As a mechanism or a method to really understand your leadership style. And big theme of the Leadership Circle is around this idea of a creative stance and a reactive stance, right? Indeed. And so those leaders who typically lead from that reactive position are really being authored, as we know, from the environment around them. So someone whose emotional intelligence, or whose emotional intelligence isn't perhaps as strong as it could be, maybe are more susceptible to that reactive leadership style, where the environment around them is really guiding and, determining how they react when it comes to decisions they make, when it comes to opinions they share, or how they lead their team, etc. How they're just a style and stance, and how they're perceived as well in the workplace. So there's for me a connection between those two aspects around how much you're in control of your leadership style versus how much you aren't. And when you're not, then it's going to be even harder for you to
you can't
make
the
right
decisions that needed to be made, right?
Exactly.
And that's the whole point. I think
Yeah.
when it comes to this reactive versus creative style, and we might do a webinar on that again, although we did a couple. So go to our Humble Associates profile. It's not the best to search for old videos, but there is
We'll do it again. Let's do it again.
We'll possibly do it again and talk about it. But the one thing which I think is important here too is, if you want to be on, as I said, your creative side, you definitely need to look within yourself. But there's more, because you not only need to look within yourself, but you also need to lead with purpose. Arif, so you probably remember Daniel Pink and his three motivators. And the first one is actually having a goal and purpose. Why do you think it's important for people?
I think it's just simple. I think it's how humans are wired, whether it's leadership or otherwise. And as you said, Mr. Pink, in his book, which is now quite popular, I think, and many of our viewers possibly have read it and are familiar with it.
Might do another webinar on that,
yeah. His whole preface there is that is that the idea that, as human beings, we are really driven by, it's very important to us that the work we do, the motivation that we have is really based around how much purpose we have in the work we're doing, right? So the more that we believe in the work we're doing as achieving something beyond and having some meaning, really has an impact in how motivated we feel in the workplace. And I think that is important in your own leadership style. If you're able to convey the purpose of why the team needs to be doing on some work or working on a particular program, project, deliverable, whatever it might be, you're able to communicate that effectively, that can really increase the level of motivation in your staff and employees.
Absolutely, I think. And, if you look at the sub points in there, we've got the mission-centric approach, the long-term vision, and the values alignment. So again, mission, vision, and values. And without, having a combination of these, it's really hard to articulate your purpose. Now, many people find different ways of articulating their purpose. I think if you can actually approach it from a point of view of like, what's your mission? What do you want to achieve? What is it that is your long-term vision? Like, what is the organization you want to become? And what are the true values you hold? By being congruent, this will help give people purpose. But it's also quite classic because many people talk about the mission, vision, and values, don't they, Arif?
Well, exactly. These aren't okay. I think this idea of purpose-driven leadership as a whole category, I'd like to think it's not entirely new, but I think it's more needed now than ever because of like how we set the scene with all the challenges we're facing. I think it's bumped up in terms of its importance, and I think we look at other trends. We look at post-pandemic. We look at how employees think about going back to the office, not going back to the office. There's these conversations still happening. A lot of work is now not done in the same way as it was done before. We've got AI coming into the picture. People are really worried about their employability long term. So there's all of this in the mix, and I think this is important because you need to be able to really communicate clearly and effectively as a leader why we're doing something, what purpose it is solved. It can't just be monetary and financial. It's got to be beyond that.
There needs to be more, right?
There has to be more. So if you're struggling with that, I think you're going to have difficulty retaining staff. You're going to have difficulty with employees really wanting to be in the workplace, doing their utmost to solve the problem you want them to solve. So you can't just rely on, okay, this is your job, and are you getting paid very well, and is it allowing? Are you able to, rely on my skill to be as effective as possible? And that's not enough. You need more than that. So I think that's what this to me speaks to in terms of the challenge we've got right now, and why I think it's important.
Yeah. You've also mentioned some other thing that we believe is really important in leadership and leadership development, which is a part of how we do things, which is actually, that's interesting, remote leadership skills. So remote leadership, Arif, that's a whole new area that wasn't there some time ago, wasn't it?
Exactly. And I was just funny you mentioned this. I was on Twitter earlier today, and there was this, I don't know if it was humorous or half truth in there, but I'm sure maybe our viewers can relate to this. Someone talking about since, they've been in remote work post-pandemic, they've never actually met their manager. And so they still don't know what their manager looks like. Now, could be true, could not be true, but it was just amusing to me that, we are in a totally different workplace environment or working culture, I should say, right? Where it's pretty normal now for employees not to be in the workplace, and therefore it requires leaders to really think outside of the box in some ways in terms of how do you do all the things we've been talking about. How are you going to be adaptive? How are you going to be purpose-driven? All of that good stuff. How are you going to motivate your team? How are you going to create a high-performing culture? How are you going to do all of that when you're not seeing your people as regularly as you were?
You need effective communication to start with, right? You need to have ways of effectively being able to communicate, which, I will admit that it's more challenging, right? Arif mentioned the workplace. The workplace can be somewhere else, and it's a different concept now. So you definitely need to communicate in this way. But also it helps to communicate globally, asynchronously. That's a large part of what we help leaders to have. And next, you need to foster team cohesion. That's an interesting example, Avarif, that you gave, but you might not have seen your team members, as we talked on our podcast, belly to belly. So you need to foster team cohesion somehow, wouldn't you?
Yeah, exactly. I think that's an important point. How you got to find different ways to get people together virtually. And I know some organizations are doing, 1 day in the office, 2 days in the office, or they may be having quarterly or monthly meetings where people are face to face. Maybe that works. It's contextual. It will depend on the organization
Always
you're in,
is, right? Yeah.
and the challenges you've got, and what works best for your team, etc., etc. That's all needs to be considered for your context. But you've got to be proactive about this, and you can't rely on it just happening. The team cohesion isn't going to just appear. Remember, we may have had office cooler moments before, and lunch breaks that people would go on, informal settings where people would meet and gather, etc., in the workplace. That's not happening. So how are you now promoting that? How are you actively doing that? That's a responsibility that leaders had before that they don't have anymore. So sorry, the other way around. The leaders didn't have before, and then they have now. So it's a totally different ballgame, I suppose.
It is, and I think many, obviously, one would say that a lot of the times leaders really weren't used to doing that. No one trained them, and this wasn't a thing a few years ago. So, and the same way, we'll talk next about technology and AI. It just wasn't something that's there. So what's really important is to make sure that you consciously build it, right? The next point we have is all about training and skill development. New leadership requires you to learn new skills, and it's just an important thing to have this mindset of continuous learning and continuous development. Not only your processes in your organization, but you personally as a leader. A leader of the 2024 plus is a lifelong leader, or a lifelong learner, I would say, sorry. So that's an important one. All right, so let's move on. The next interesting thing we have for you. Go ahead, Arif.
No, I was just wondering, I think maybe we get some of our audience to interact and maybe share some of their thoughts.
So what's the question you have for our audience, Arif?
Well, my question is, do you relate to any of these kind of trends that we've been discussing? Do you feel any are more important than others?
Yeah.
Put your thoughts in the comment. Or do you have something completely different?
Maybe disagree with some. Feel free to let us know.
Of course,
we'd love a discussion. We hope that our comments feature will work for us, but if it doesn't, it will work eventually. LinkedIn is definitely a leader in very interesting ways of communication, but we shouldn't complain. We're live on LinkedIn all the time, and at least you can see us and hear us. So it's actually an interesting segue to the next point, which is all about technology, right? So technology and data literacy. And it's an interesting thing that you've mentioned, Arif, about, people are remote, not all of them and so on, but it's supported by technology, and the processes had to reflect. And can you be a leader in modern times not being technically literate? That's a question there.
Yeah, I think it's going to be difficult, isn't it? I mentioned AI earlier on. I mentioned that this is now becoming ubiquitous, as we've seen in the last year. We see more of it. We see as it keeps on going, as it progresses and becomes even more kind of popular. I was met up with an ex-colleague the other week, and she works at Microsoft, and she was describing how their Copilot AI tool is really revolutionizing. Can I say that? Sorry. The way productivity works when it comes to their suite of tools, for instance. I mean, she was talking about, now you can tell, if you've got a PowerPoint deck you need to create, you can tell Copilot, I want a deck that looks like this and has this kind of information and with this tone of voice, etc. And bang, within a few seconds, it can get something up on the screen for you. So the world is moving out, and I think what that means is, unfortunately, perhaps, is organizations are going to be looking at efficiency more than perhaps productivity. So they're going to be looking at, okay, how do we use these tools and technologies to be efficient in how we work? That may mean, reskilling and repurposing where people in an organization sit. So as a leader, how are you going to deal with that challenge, right? How are you going to be able to perhaps be involved in the digital transformation of the workplace, but also at the same thing, which is important, but also then be prepared to have the right conversations with your employees and staff about what's best for them and what type of role changes they need to be perhaps looking at in order to remain adaptive within this environment.
This new trend of advanced automation and AI, right? As Arif mentioned, is just quite a thing. And, maybe in a year's time, we will have a webinar about leadership on how to lead AIs as conscious beings that need leadership too. But with Arif, we have some philosophical differences. Arif doesn't believe it will happen. I think it will happen soon enough, but future will tell,
Not convinced.
as they say.
Not convinced in the same way, no.
Not convinced in the same way. It's not the topic of our webinar, but if you're interested about discussions like this, we have a podcast. We'll share it later on. But I think it's really important that we acknowledge that something is afoot, that there is a change, and you can't stay in the past. You have to understand, and as a leader, it's your responsibility to get people there. And as I mentioned in the first point, the literacy is important. But if people are facing fears based, or job security fears based on the fact there's automation and AI, you need to be there to help them. It's your responsibility, isn't it? Go ahead.
I was listening to it was a podcast actually today. I think it was something maybe in our podcast we may come back to, TK, but just as a brief segue on this point, there's an interview of a CEO of Timpson's, which is many of our listeners, maybe viewers, from outside the UK won't be familiar, but they're a UK retailer. And he was talking about this same point about how he actually actively has conversations with his staff around finding places for them that they will feel happy in. What he means by that is that it's important for him that employees and staff are happy. And so there are times when staff in his organization might not be happy working there, which is normal. It can happen. And so he'd rather support them and help them by finding a job elsewhere. And I don't think there are many leaders out there who have the kind of proactiveness and the desire to then want to find their employees jobs outside of their business. But I thought that was a nice way to think about it, because what's important for him is that people are happy, that you treat people with respect, kindness, etc. So just on that point, I think you got to be prepared. It's a very good point,
Arif, but it also goes to my next point, which is data-driven decision-making at scale, right?
Okay.
So looking at all kinds of data, including like how people are happy in your organization, is really important. The world is really data-driven now, and I think the way we help our leaders make decisions is always look at experiments, always look at hypotheses, make sure there's always data that can support your decision, because things can be deceiving, right? Here in social media, on LinkedIn, we are on analytics all the time, on LinkedIn, on our podcast, and it's difficult to make decisions. Like there's marketing leaders, for instance, I'm sure amongst ourselves, or people leaders. We've seen many A's, and you need to make your decisions somehow. Or the leaders that you care for need to make decisions. So we all also think we need to focus on that. But I've got the last point for you. Go ahead, Arif.
Go on. No, just finish that.
No. I just wanted to go to our last one. But before we do, let's talk about what we have in our comments. Because, for instance, Daniel has a great comment that in this reality of remote teams or global teams, because people have been remote just maybe in offices before, it's just so important to have these sessions, to have the abilities to reach out and communicate effectively. And we absolutely agree.
Yeah. Definitely. But on that data point, I think it's interesting going back to that. I think, yeah, you're right in terms of decisions being made from the, facts and information. We did a podcast on this, on evidence-based management, so you can check that one out if you're interested. And just on that one, I think one of the things that we talked about there, and just to bring it back here a little bit, is we do see, or we find, there are still too many leaders out there who, make their decisions based on beliefs which are strongly held, which can be okay, but the reality is, if you're not willing to take into data, evidence, and test out assumptions that you have, then are you really doing what's best for you or what's best for the organization? That's the question. So you really need to think hard, and it goes back to the start of our conversation about self-awareness, self-regulation, your emotional intelligence, etc. All of that good stuff. If you've got that solid foundational stuff in terms of how you see yourself, your leadership style, obviously it's going to be easier for you to think about, okay, this is not about me, this is about the organization, this is about the team, this is about what's best for the whole unit that I'm involved in, and so I need to make the right decisions. It's not just because I think it's the right thing to do, and it's because I want it to happen, right? There's we've all got experiences, I'm sure, TK, where we worked with leaders, managers who lead from that position. Okay, no, this is right. I know it's right. I'm going to do this.
I feel it in my gut.
I feel it. Yeah, exactly. All well and good, but the reality is always more nuanced than that, and it's not always as black and white. So
it is. It's a good
just
point.
Wanted to,
and you need to adapt to it, because the last point I wanted to mention is an interesting one, because we believe in adaptive leadership. We believe in agile leadership, and agile leadership is the key thing. In fact, in the article, it's on the first place, but we moved it to the last place because we didn't want to blow our trumpet a bit too hard. But in terms of what they found, the wonderful authors, which we wholeheartedly agree with, is as a leader, you need to embrace change. You need to orient your organization and everyone towards learning, and you need flexibility and agility. So why is this kind of leadership so important, Arif?
Well, it goes back again to where we started the conversation, right? With the world constantly in flux, lots of things constantly changing. If you are not prepared as a leader to, like we said, look at data, look at what's happening, adjust what you're doing accordingly, then you're going to struggle with keeping up with whatever's going on around you. It's a simple. We saw in the pandemic, the businesses and organizations that adapted fast as a result of the pandemic survived, grew, and were successful. Others, unfortunately, fell apart. Some closed, and many names that we had, household names of organizations, no longer with us.
That's the sad truth, right? And this is why Humble Associates, we help you to grow not only leaders, but agile leaders.
Yes.
And, if you're interested in that, have a look at our website. And most of all, if you'd like to know more from us, we are here on LinkedIn all the time. So check us out, check Arif, myself, our other team members, check our company profile. But most of all, check our podcast, because that's an interesting thing. So, Arif, why should people listen to our podcast?
Well, I think this is like our gift to the world, in the sense of this is okay, I'll be serious for a moment. We're excited about agile leadership. We think it has a place in the world. We think it's really important and valuable. Everything that we've talked about today really links into it, and we're trying to provide a fresh, dynamic kind of approach through our podcast of taking examples from the world around us, news, current events, what's going on, stories that you might have missed, and we're trying to find lessons from there as to why agile leadership can really benefit you, your organization, and how you lead. And that's what we do with our podcast. So please download our latest episode, subscribe, give us a rating, and we'd be most appreciative.
So it's Leading with Agility on your favorite podcast player. You can scan the code or just type Leading with Agility on your favorite platform. We're on all of them, so we're very easy to find. And also our slides are very easy to find. You can download them straight after the webinar. I'll send out an email. You can download the slides, view the recordings. So if you forget what leadership development in the modern times is 2024 and beyond is all about, you can easily find us. But for now, we'd like to thank you for your attention. Thank you for coming in. Thank you for all your wonderful comments.
Thank you so much.
And it's been a wonderful session. Thank you for joining in such a large group.
Take care, everyone. Have a good rest of the day. Thank you.
Bye-bye.